Hey guys, it's Courtney. I am here with a video for Jess and Laura's Hooray for 3K video hop celebrating 3,000 subscribers. I am going to be using the stamp set Aloha by Studio Katia. And of course, it's a floral set. And I am bringing out my Misty here, and I'm going to be stamping. I think I ended up stamping out all of the images, including this large floral arrangement, the individual flower, and the two individual leaves. And I am stamping onto a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I am going to go ahead and stamp this twice with blackout ink by Ink on 3, which is definitely my favorite ink for Copic coloring. My ink pad is a little dry, so that's the reason why I don't get a great impression the first time. It's not the stamp, it's not the Misty, it's my ink pad. So I did, like I said, go ahead and stamp these out twice, and then we'll move right into the Copic coloring. So I'm not going to show you all of the coloring here because some of it is a little repetitive, but I'll show you the color combinations I used. So we're going to start off with this single flower here, and like always, I am starting off with my lightest color to map out the darkest areas. Now I Googled these type of flowers. These are hibiscus, I think you pronounce it, and the centers are super, super dark. So I want to make sure that I leave the centers very dark. You can see that they're kind of caved in a little bit, so they would naturally be darker, that area. I'm also creating a shadow where one petal is laying under another. And also you can see that I'm creating little V's on the tips of the petals where there already is some lines within the illustration. So they're kind of guiding me as to where I put these. And these are going to kind of be folds or some texture within the petals. Once I got my darkest color down, or what was going to be my darkest color, it wasn't dark enough. I like to use the really scary darks. So I'm going to bring in my RV69, which is super dark. And I'm just adding a teeny tiny bit of that just in the center of the flower, in the base of the petals where they're all kind of gathered in the center. And then I'll blend that out just a little bit with that RV29, then moving on to the RV25, and I'm just extending these areas out a little bit further, including the shadows as well as these little V's that we have created on the tips of the petals. I'm just making them a little bit longer and a little bit wider. Moving on to the RV23, and I'm doing the same thing here, just extending those areas out on each one of the petals, including these little V's, making those even wider and even longer. And then I will move back to my RV21 and blend all of these areas out, filling in those highlight areas, which is pretty much just the tips of the petals. Now, once I had the coloring done, I realized that there just wasn't enough texture. I could see my little V's or my little folds within my petals, but they weren't as noticeable as I wanted them to be. So I brought back in my RV25, I believe it was, and I just made these a little bit longer and then blended these out a little bit with the lighter colors, and this gave it the texture and that I was looking for, because these flowers naturally do have a lot of texture to them. Whenever I'm not sure of what flowers are supposed to be colored like, I just Google it. So I liked that much better. For the center of the flower, I don't know whether this would be considered a stamen because it's just kind of like one little area there. I'm going to go ahead and color these yellow-ish. I am taking my colorless blender. I did kind of go over this area with that dark pink. I'm not going to be able to completely remove it, but I was able to kind of fade that back before going in with my yellows. Just going to use two colors here. It's a really teeny tiny area. You actually don't have to do any shading for it at all. Now I colored the other flowers the same, but I am going to show you this little bud here just because I put my shading here a little bit different, but use the same color combination. You can kind of see that it's folded over on itself a little bit. So that fold itself is going to be the lightest color, but it's also going to create a shadow where it's folded over on itself. So underneath the fold and above the fold is going to be a little bit darker. Also, the very tip of that petal is kind of curved. So my highlight for that little curve is going to be in the center. So I'm adding a little bit of shading on the base of that petal and on the very tip of the petal. And this will kind of keep that shape of that curvy line or curvy wave that it has going on. So like I said, I went ahead and colored the other two full flowers as well as this other little bud the same way with the same color combination. I'm going to keep out those yellows for these little, I guess they aren't steaming because they're kind of just there by themselves, but I'm using the same Y38, Y35, and then I'm going to bring in my Y04 just for my highlight area, and this will kind of brighten it up a little bit. It's a really, really bright yellow, so I'm using it sparingly, and I'm using it right over that Y35 just to brighten it up just a tiny bit. So for the leaves, there are 3 different leaves here. So I'm going to show you one of each leaf. I used 3 different green combinations and colored them a little bit different. So we're going to start off with this leaf here, and this one is kind of caved in on themselves. And I also Googled this. And these are usually caved in. So the darkest area would be in the center. And these also have little wavy lines on either side. And where those little wavy lines are dipped in, I'm also creating those little triangles just like we did with the flower, and this will give the leaf some texture and some movement just like the flower has. And like I said, that's what Google showed me. So I went in with my darkest color just to go over those areas that we had mapped out with that lightest color, and then blending those areas out as I move down to the lightest color again using those little triangles there and just making them a little bit wider and a little bit longer each and every time. I did keep a lot of space for my highlight color here because these leaves are usually pretty bright green, bright yellow green, I should say. I kept a lot of space for the YG01 because that is the lightest YG color that I own for my Copics. So the next leaf here, I'm going to bring out a different green combination, and this one is kind of tucked behind these flowers in this little arrangement here. So again, as always, starting off with my lightest color to map out my darkest areas. And this leaf is kind of more, I guess you could say, more of a traditional leaf, a regular leaf, I guess, but it is kind of curved. So again, because it's kind of curved, I'm going to add some shading to the base of the leaf as well as the tip of the leaf. I'm only adding a teeny tiny bit to the tip of the leaf in this one because it's not overly curved. It's just a little bit. So I don't want to add too much shading to the tip. But I'm blending those areas out each time, tip and the base of the leaf, and leaving the center for that G00 for my highlight color. And there are 2 more of these leaves that I colored the same way, also creating a shadow where it is tucked behind or underneath the rest of the flowers. For the remaining leaves, I'm going to bring out a different green combination, but these are also curved, as you can see. So I'm going to basically color these the same way, making sure that I leave a center highlight, going in with that darkest color to create that shadow on the base of the leaf, and then just a few little flicks on the tip of the leaf, blending that out with the G24, then the G21, and then leaving the center highlight for that G20 again. So finished up all of the leaves, colored them the same way as I did for the others. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that aside, and we're going to die cut all of those images. Next, I'm taking a piece of Canson watercolor paper, and this is cut a little bit larger than an A2 size card. I believe it is 5 3/4 by 4 1/2. And I'm just using some washi tape to go ahead and stick this down to my mat. I typically stick it down to a board, but I was too lazy to grab it. So I'm just using my board here. I'm not going to use a ton of water, so I'm not too concerned about it. Going to bring out some Distress Oxide inks. I'm going to be using Squeezed Lemonade, Twisted Citron, and just a little bit of Picked Raspberry. So I'm just smushing some of this ink onto a craft mat here, and I have my jar of water there. And I'm gonna take a paintbrush and just saturate my paper. And I'm working from the bottom right-hand corner up. And that's basically where I'm going to concentrate on where I'm dropping my color, even though my color is going to spread beyond that. So I'm going to drop in a little bit of that squeezed lemonade, and you can see that I am bringing that up a little bit, but it is significantly lighter on the top left corner than it is on the bottom right. I want to kind of concentrate my color in one particular area, have some cat hair there that I was trying to very carefully pick up with the brush. Dropped in some of that twisted citron and let that kind of blend with the squeezed lemonade, which honestly, they're very similar in color anyway. They're pretty bright. And next, I'm just going to take a skinny paintbrush, and I think this is a number 2 round brush, and I'm just going to pick up some of that picked raspberry, and I'm going to spatter that on. I'm not going to necessarily blend it. I'm just going to kind of spatter it on, but my panel is still wet. It wasn't spreading as I wanted it to, so I'm going to go in with a damp paintbrush and kind of just tap over some of those spatter marks and let that spread just a little bit. So I went ahead and let this panel dry. I let it air dry most of the time, but as you can see, I got a little impatient and I did end up using my heat tool, which is why it is so warped. So I'm going to take 1/4 of an inch off of all 4 sides, making this a little bit smaller than an A2 size card. Going to use this foam adhesive by Sizzix. I think I got this in a card kit at one time and forgot I had it. So I'm going to trim this down just a little bit smaller than the card panel itself. And I'm bringing in a top folding A2 size note card here. Going to remove the adhesive on one side of this foam adhesive here. And let me tell you, this is sticky. It is really sticky. So once it's down, it's down. So you want to make sure that you have this cut correctly and it's not too large because you're never going to get it back up. So I went ahead and carefully lined that up onto my card base here because, as you guys probably know, I have a hard time lining things up. And like I said, once it's down, it's down. So you can see I have a big streak there, and I don't know what that's from. Probably from my ring, maybe. Maybe the panel wasn't completely dry, but we're going to cover that up with the sentiment. So I've kind of just played around with the placement of my flowers, and then we're going to go ahead and heat emboss the sentiment. I'm using 3 different words from that stamp set, lining the first 2 up on my grid mat, making sure that those are lined up in a straight line, popping those onto an acrylic block, and then taking that second word there, sunshine, and I'll stamp that out separately. That's significantly larger than the first 2 words. Going to take a piece of black cardstock there. I treated that with my anti-static tool, stamping the first sentiment with embossing ink by Simon Says Stamp, treating the other side of that cardstock with my anti-static tool again, and then stamping that sunshine with that same embossing ink. Sprinkling on some white Hero Arts embossing powder, making sure my heat gun is completely heated up before bringing that to the paper. Usually with sentiment strips, this doesn't matter all that much, but I like to avoid or at least reduce the amount of warping that I have. It just makes the cutting of the little tiny strips that I'm going to be cutting here a little bit easier if the paper isn't so warped. So being I have all of this dimension with the foam adhesive that we used, I'm not going to pop anything up. I'm just making sure that I am happy with the placement of everything before I adhere everything down. I was initially going to put those leaves underneath my sentiment, but I didn't like that look at all. So we're just going to go with the original placement here, and I am going to glue everything down with my Tombow Mono multi glue. I do have a teeny tiny bit of the leaves kind of sticking out or sticking over my panel, but not enough where they're going to fold in an envelope or anything like that. So I'm not worried about putting any foam adhesive behind those areas. I think it's stable enough. So place the leaves down first, making sure that they are kind of tucked underneath my flower. And then I am going to glue down my sentiment strips as well with that same adhesive, making sure that I cover up that little scuff mark that I got onto my card panel. So next I am going to add a little bit of shimmer to just the flowers with a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen, making sure that I don't go over the green, because sometimes this shimmer pen can kind of pick up some of that color, especially if it's a dark color like we used. I'm going to finish up the card by adding a few Nuvo Dream Drops, and I think this is called Love Potion, but I will link it below along with the rest of the supplies, and just added a few of these around the sentiment. And that is it. That is the card for today. I will have all of the information about the hop listed below, as well as all of the supplies. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great day. Bye.